Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Cleopatra Mosana. I'm the Head of Communications at National Treasury. We're here gathered today to come and brief you on the update of the progress report of Operation Vulindlela, which is a program run by National Treasury and the Presidency. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'd like to invite the Deputy Minister of Finance to make opening remarks, and he will be followed by the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Ms. Nongceba Mhlawuli. Thank you so much. Over to you, Deputy Minister Masondo.
It is good morning, right? Welcome to the third quarterly report of phase 2 of the Operation Vulindlela. And as Cleo has said, we are a team working together with, so the team Operation Vulindlela, as you know, it's led by the National Treasury and the Presidency, and Deputy Minister Nongceba here, she's with us, and I'm here representing National Treasury. So the quarterly report, this is the third one on Operation Vulindlela Phase 2. And just to remind colleagues about the Operation Vulindlela, its strategic intent is really to deal with the supply side constraint on our economy. That's its origin. We've had supply side constraints on our economy, and that's why it has not been growing, particularly since the global economic crisis, 2007, 2008. We had issues with the supply of electricity, freight logistics, telecommunication, skills, and we said it's important for us to open up those network industries which were dominated by inefficient state-owned companies. We said it's not good for us to rely on one supplier of energy, Eskom. It's not enough for us to rely on one company, Transnet, which supplies freight logistics, and therefore it's important for us to open up those industries to allow competition to take place in order to solve for energy supply, freight logistics, telecommunications, as well as skills. And we've given progress in the past on what this opening up of those network industries has done. We have seen huge investments by the private sector in the energy space, in freight logistics, telecoms, and water. We've put together an act which will enable the National Water Resource Agency to raise more money, private money, to be invested in water. So today really is to give an update on what we have achieved in the last quarter, and also report the next steps insofar as Operation Vulindlela is concerned. So I wouldn't spend too much time because DM also has to say something, but also the team will give a much more detailed and a comprehensive report on the progress on those areas that we've identified as critical for reform. So these reforms, they don't represent the totality of what government does. We've just chosen a few reforms which we felt that are quite strategic and very important for us to focus on them in order to set better conditions for economic growth. So there's a lot of things that government does. These are not the things that government is doing. These are not the only things that government is doing. There's a couple of things that government is doing. We just chose to focus on these reforms, to have a strategic focus and discipline in order to accelerate economic growth. With those words, let me ask DM to come over and make a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DM, and good morning, colleagues. You can see that the DM is quite a veteran on this platform. This is my first OV media briefing, of course, having been delegated OV since the 7th administration. So good morning to the Deputy Minister, Masondo, members of the media who are here today joining us physically as well as online. Captains of industry, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here today. As we launch this progress report for the third quarter, as outlined by DM Masondo, outlining the steps we have taken to advance the economic reform agenda, it is important to step back and situate this report within the broader moment in which our country finds itself in. Our country is operating in a constrained global environment, as we all know. Growth globally remains uneven, geopolitical tensions, trade fragmentation, climate shocks, and tighter financial conditions continue to place pressure on emerging economies such as South Africa. Domestically, we continue to contend with the legacy of infrastructure underinvestment, uneven service delivery, and the imperative to restore confidence in the state's capacity to implement. Against this backdrop, the progress report that's going to be released today reflected, the progress reflected in this report therefore matters. It matters because South Africa's growth outlook is not determined only by external conditions, but by our ability to remove long-standing structural constraints that have held the economy back for more than a decade. It matters because ratings agencies, investors, businesses, citizens are increasingly looking not at policy intent, but whether reforms are being executed consistently and credibly. Without repeating what has already been said by the DM, I want to emphasize only just 2 points. The first is that our reform momentum has strengthened and that the state is increasingly moving from planning to delivery, and we are seeing the green shoots of those in our economic outlook. As the President said, we are seeing important green shoots in our economy, 4 consecutive quarters of positive growth, positive economic growth, declining unemployment, a strengthening currency, and rising commodity prices are all acting as powerful tailwinds of our economic recovery agenda. The reform program that we are pursuing through Operation Vulindlela, also known as OV, is essential to ensure that these positive indicators result in a sustained shift in our economic trajectory rather than a temporary lift in growth. Ultimately, these reforms, whether in energy, water, and logistics sectors, or even our immigration system, are about unlocking much higher rates of fixed investment in the economy and powering long-term growth. Colleagues, the second is that these reforms aim to improve the lives of ordinary South Africans. That is why in phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, we are focused on achieving a more inclusive, not only more rapid economic growth. The reduction in load shedding, which has resulted from the reforms in the energy sector, has had tangible impact on our households and businesses. Likewise, reforms in the rail system have supported the recovery of passenger rail services, with the majority of our corridors now up and running and providing cheaper public transport for the citizens of this country, particularly in our major cities. Going forward, as we advance more recent reforms in housing policy and the local government system, We will make programs on many of the issues that are the most critical for poor households, which include improving the delivery of basic services, making our cities work more effectively, and accelerating the delivery of well-located and dignified housing so that the people can live closer to their places of work and, most importantly, our centers of the economy. Finally, what this report shows is that now is a good time to invest in South Africa. For more than a decade, we have experienced low levels of economic growth and high levels of uncertainty. This year, however, we are turning a corner, largely as a result of our commitment to far-reaching economic reform. By strengthening our economic fundamentals and creating an environment for growth, we can protect our economy from global disruptions and take advantages of the opportunities that are emerging alongside them. All of this combines to make a strong case for investment in order to capitalize on South Africa's growth story. Thank you once again for joining us here today and for the continuing engagement with this particular program, which is Operation Vulindlela, as we continue to work for a more inclusive economy through the reform program. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank both Deputy Ministers for their insightful remarks, and now I'd like to invite Mr. Rudy Deeks, who's going to take us through the...
Okay. Okay, thank you. Maybe just to start off, so of course I'll be joined by Saul and Alia, who would lead on some of the content, and I'll give you a quick introduction, but maybe just to thank DM Basondo and DM Crowley for the ongoing and continued political support, and this is important. Right? So in the back end, there's a technical team that works fairly hard on driving the reforms, engaging on it, helping departments, and I'm sure that we're able to track and monitor the progress and assist. But there's also, as we show, strong political backing to ensure that this does happen. So thanks, DM Crowley. She's the newbie to the OV, so as she says, this is the first, but she's going to join us continually. Thanks so much. So we'll quickly go through, I'll do some of the introductory slides and then hand over some of the more detailed content to the two leads on OV on the Q3 report. Can we just go, where do I go to the next slide here? Or someone else controlling it? Oh, here it is. It's hidden away behind this thing. Okay. So just to remind you, of course, the focus for phase 2 is the continuation, firstly, of the core reforms that we have to drive through from phase 1, transforming the electricity sector to achieve energy security. Importantly, also about bringing down price and cost and making sure that we have a competitive market, as Demasonde had indicated. Very same, we'll apply that to creating a world-class logistics sector and supporting our ability to be able to get goods from port to port, as we normally refer to it, water and water infrastructure, and to ensure water security is quite critical for us. And then, of course, as you'll see in the report, some fundamental progress in achieving the visa reform systems that would be able to attract critical skills for growth, as well as investments, particularly on the tourism stuff. Just to remind you again, we've added 3 additional reforms, one on spatial and creating dynamic cities, and this is quite an important part of our work, harnessing digital public infrastructure as growth and inclusion, and there's some quite significant progress that we've made in there. And more importantly, of course, in the coalface, which is the support to improve service delivery and local government, so that we deliver on basic services going forward. So this is a quick reminder on that. You are familiar with this dashboard. Again, this is a reflection from what we see as Operation Vulindlela on the progress that we've made. You'll remember last year also that, in actual fact, Business Leadership South Africa had launched a reform tracker. This is quite interesting because we had actually encouraged that, that there's external view on whether we're making progress or not, and they potentially would release that. But for us, I think we have made and continue to drive the implementation of the reform programs. And this dashboard, of course, just gives you indication on the color codes where we are and where we're not. So 10% or 3 reforms facing significant challenges and interventions required, and that's what we're doing, and Saul and Alia will go through that. More importantly, the reforms that are progress are on track is 47%. So close to half of the reforms are on track. 0 reforms that we haven't started yet, and 0 reforms completed and no further work required. And then again, I think 40% of reforms that are delayed, is that saying? Yeah, delayed track, not progressing well. Delayed off track, sorry. I forgot to put on the spectacles, okay? But now I can see, but progressing well. So if you take accumulated progress on it and you look at it, you can see quite a significant, just under 90% of the reforms are making progress, and some slightly off track, but it's moving ahead. So I think from reflection of what we're doing as government with the departments shows that we are making progress. 1 reform completed and no further work required, and 0 reforms that are facing critical challenges. That means we got to now do a particular set of intervention in doing that. This is just a reflection on each and every one, and again, the team will reflect on that. So 60% of the reforms that we've identified in electricity, 40% off track, as we've said, and that requires for us to be able to support. Freight logistics, I think the minister there has made some phenomenal progress around much of the reform, and as you have noticed, stabilization in volumes, particularly both in port and rail space. Water again. Again, the minister and the team and the DG there has been quite active in ensuring that they do deliver on the reform programs. Half of the reforms for the visa that we've identified has been completed, and there's another half that is on track. Local government, we are on track, and quite important for us to be able to drive through to a logical end. Spatial integration, 20% of it is not on track, and there's a support intervention to be able to do that. And then 100% of the digital transformation. Of course, as you know, the digital transformation roadmap was adopted by Cabinet during the course of last year. We set up a digital unit within the presidency, jointly between ourselves, National Treasury, and of course, Department of Digital Communication, Digital and Telecommunications, to be able to ensure we do that. That has been driven quite succinctly and with a level of clarity in ensuring that we deal with that going forward. What is the key message that we want to leave that have been quite well reflected by the 2 deputy ministers? So the important part is that we've seen significant progress, firstly in the electricity sector, and the minister there has been quite adamant around driving the reform, but also ensuring that he address some of the more critical challenges that are there. What we have seen, for example, is regulatory approvals and institutional developments that advance, for example, transitions to a competitive electricity market. So rules to access the grid, for example, right, have been adopted, for example, by NERSA. Market operator license to the National Transmission Company of South Africa, an important step towards the end of last year in that quarter as well. On logistics, Transnet has seen a maintenance, and we've seen the stabilization of volumes. Not yet at the volumes that the minister has set out over the next 3 to 4 years, which is 250 million tons. But what we have seen is a significant stabilization of the volumes as we support the work through the National Logistics Crisis Committee and the support work from Operation Vulindlela. And you'll see that reflected in higher rail volumes and continued progress with fleet renewal. Major milestone that we have been tracking, and many of you have been, of course, talking about, is that we finally signed a long-term concession agreement for the Durban Container Port Terminal. And that new it's called Durban Gateway, right? I can't get the right name. Durban Gateway. Is it Durban Gateway what? There's another name. Durban Gateway Terminal. That's the new that has been established around the partnership between Transnet and ICTSI, the Filipino company that had won the bid. Of course, as you're familiar with that, it had gone to court, and that matter has has been finalized with no further legal action being taken. So operationally, they have started the 1st of January, and that's one of the more important PSPs through a strategic equity partner that would operate on one of the most busiest and largest container terminals on the African continent. Sustained progress in implementing reform commitments resulted in higher policy credibility and growing confidence, as reflected by both Dear Masonda and Claule. And that, as you've seen towards the end of last year, had sort of boosted quite significantly the level of confidence with a sort of whole series of different things, coming together and giving an important boost and confidence, OVI being one of those contributory factors. So we've seen significant progress across all reform areas. The next quarter will be completing many of the outstanding regulatory processes, operationalize new institutions like the Water Resource Infrastructure Agency and others, project implementation to ensure reforms translate into tangible economic and service delivery outcomes. Ultimately, while the reforms is about unlocking growth and investment, I thought the point that Deputy Minister Claudia makes, it is about service delivery, it is about employment, it is about creating opportunities for many young people out there to get into jobs, into business, and opening up the economy. So we are quite excited with the launch of this third quarter and the progress that we've made. We started this year with, hitting the ground running, and of course we'll continue to drive as Treasury and ourselves implementation and supporting implementation by the different departments, and ensuring that we keep to the commitments that we've made publicly, and that we drive the reform program to its logical conclusion. So you'll come through to this one, right? So come through. Is that okay?
Thank you, Rudy, and good morning, everyone. I'll pick up and briefly where Rudy left off, which is to say that Operation Vulindlela's single-minded focus is to achieve more rapid and more inclusive economic growth. That is what it exists to do. And I think we're starting off this year, as the President said earlier this week, with some wind in our sails. We're seeing real signs of positive momentum building in the economy, green shoots of economic recovery, and a lot of momentum built towards the end of last year, whether it's the removal of South Africa from the FATF grey list, the upgrade of our credit rating by S&P, strengthening currency, rising commodity prices, etc. But our view, as Diem Plauli said in her opening remarks, is that the structural reform agenda is crucial, both to lift confidence in the economy as a whole, but also to lift potential growth and to ensure that we can translate these gains and rising confidence into a long-term increase in growth across the economy. So I think we're seeing encouraging signs, and if you look at what was published in the MTBPS last year, since our last quarterly update, we now have updated numbers from National Treasury's modeling about the expected impact on GDP growth if these reforms are fully implemented. So if you look at the red line on the right-hand side, that shows the upside reform scenario in which the Vulindlela Phase 2 reforms are fully implemented, and the additional lift to GDP growth above baseline, the baseline projection in MTBPS. And for example, if you look at 2028, where the baseline projects 2% growth, growth could be as much as 1.4% higher than that baseline, assuming full swift implementation. So that's just to sort of place in relief why we are pursuing this reform agenda, why it matters. And if you read the S&P, the reason for its decision in November last year, I think investors, rating agencies, and so on recognize the increasing momentum of reform implementation and the increasing credibility of these policy commitments. In every report, we feature a few particular reforms in some more depth, and I'll briefly go through the ones that we highlight in this quarter's report and then hand over to Alia to go through some of the detail. The first of those is just to illustrate the growing pipeline of investment in energy generation. For the first time, again since our last report, we now have an open data portal published by the National Transmission Company of South Africa, which shows not only the number of projects that are registered. We've previously reported NERSA data, which is the number of projects that register with the regulator before they commence implementation. We now have data on the grid connection process, the number of projects that have actually been either reserved or allocated grid capacity on the network, and so are, either in execution or close to it. And the latest number, this is from the end of last year, is sitting at just under 24 gigawatts of projects, mostly renewable energy, that are in the grid connection process. And of those, more than 8.5 gigawatts is either in or proceeding to construction. So, again, we talk about the grid capacity constraints. There are real constraints, but there is capacity in the network in various provinces that has been allocated already. There isn't much left beyond that, but that which has been allocated can be utilized, and those projects are proceeding. And we give numbers towards the bottom of this graph, year on year, what we expect to actually connect to the grid. And that's available on the NTCSA website. But I think what it shows is that this investment, very large scale investment, all private investment in the energy system, is starting to flow. This year is a big year for market reform. As Rudy said, we will see the launch of the South African wholesale electricity market, the competitive wholesale market for South Africa. In the report, we talk about international experience of similar reforms. This is from the Energy Council, recent report that the Council put together. And it just shows, in a similar reform scenario in India in the mid-2000s, the impact that the introduction of wholesale competition had, bringing down prices in the Indian context from $200 per megawatt hour before the introduction of competition to less than $60 today. So you have much more supply, much more investment in generation, competition creating greater efficiencies, reducing costs, generators effectively competing on the basis of price. And we're hoping that through the launch of SAWEM, we can create a similar effect in South Africa. Ultimately, the point of these electricity market reforms is to achieve lower electricity prices for consumers in South Africa and for industry. We also highlight the sustained progress in the water use licensing system. This is a reform from phase one. We re-engineered the water use license application system working with DWS. And if you look at the graph on the slide, in 2022, the department was processing only slightly more than 100 applications per quarter in as much as 300 days or higher. So very few, less than 20% of applications were being processed in under 90 days. If you look at progress today in the most recent quarter that we have data for, we're processing close to 500, in fact more than 500 water use license applications per quarter, with more than 70% of those being processed within 90 days. So this is purely to make the point that these reforms, they do take time to implement. A lot of these are institutionally complex. We're re-engineering processes, but they do stick. And now a few years out, we're seeing the sustained kind of progress that you can actually turn around these systems in the long term. And lastly, very encouragingly, we focused very much in phase one on reform of the visa system. Last year, we saw the launch of the electronic travel authorization system, the ETA. The ETA has already processed over 60,000 visas. It's fully online. You get your visa as a PDF with a QR code, facial recognition at borders, and so on. And what we saw at the end of last year was a record number of tourist arrivals published by Stats SA, the Department of Tourism, speaking about this earlier in the week. And that's important because, tourism already sustains close to 2 million jobs in South Africa, but we know that for every 13 new arrivals, we create one sustainable job. So these visa reforms are making South Africa a much more attractive destination for tourism, growing the sector very rapidly. And again, just another example of the real tangible impact as these reforms are implemented. So there's more detail on all of this in the report, which will be circulated after this briefing. But at that point, I'll hand over to Alia to go through some of the detail.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm just going to take you through some of the detailed milestones, although a lot of it has been touched on, particularly in the energy space, as well as the next steps. And obviously, all this detail is available in the report that's going to be published online in an hour or two. So obviously, a lot of this has been touched on. The big milestones in the energy space are really around institutional development as well as a regulatory framework for a competitive wholesale electricity market, which is important for a number of reasons, including lowering the cost of electricity. And that includes the approval of the market operator license, the grid allocation rules, as well as electricity trading rules, to create sort of a clear and transparent regulatory framework. In the report, we also go into some of the detail around the additional capacity that's been added. But just to talk about the 7th bid window of REAP, 4 additional preferred bidders were announced with a total capacity of 890 megawatts, which amounts to 16 billion rand. And Saul's already shown the pipeline of investments in the embedded generation space. This brings the total capacity of this bid window to 3,940 megawatts. One of the developments that we have not spoken about in the energy space is around the independent transmission projects, which is significant in terms of, it's significant because of the limited transmission capacity. It's also significant in terms of bringing the private sector into the transmission space for the first time. So the first phase caters for around 1,100 kilometers of transmission lines, but overall, the program aims to leverage around 440 billion rand in investment in transmission, which is significant. This is obviously supported by the credit guarantee vehicle, which the National Treasury, together with the World Bank and DEE, have designed, which balances the risk between the private sector and government. So in terms of the next steps, I think it's this, the energy space has been quite contested over the last few years. And I think what's important for us is to have certainty around the pathway forward. So included in this would be to develop a detailed implementation plan for the establishment of the TSO, the transmission system operator, to submit the market code to NERSA for approval to establish the wholesale market, as well as publishing guidance on the structure of as well as publishing sort of a position paper on what the structure of the competitive wholesale market should look like, finalizing the electricity rules, and importantly, publishing the electricity distribution industry roadmap. As part of a first phase of improving distribution are the distribution agency agreements, which have been outlined by or developed by Eskom, so that they can manage the retail and operational portion of distribution for some municipalities. And I think they've identified around 14 municipalities. In terms of the logistics reforms, we've already touched on the improved performance of Transnet, and the next focus, besides operational improvements, the focus has also been on restructuring of Transnet, particularly in terms of the Ports Authority and the Rail Infrastructure Manager. So detailed technical work is underway to do this. It is complex work to do. There are tax issues, there are debt issues. So it's a fairly long process, and we haven't done this before, but many other countries have done this. So we are leveraging a lot of expertise to develop these sorts of positions in terms of how you establish these corporatized entities. We've mentioned the major milestone around the DCT Pier 2, so I won't go into that, but just to note that this investment brings more than 11 billion rand in infrastructure, new equipment and advanced technology, which the ports severely need. It also increases the terminal handling capacity by just under 1 million TEUs. You would recall that in December 2024, we launched the network statement, the first network statement, which basically sets out the rules for operators, the access conditions for operators on the freight rail network. So there were 11 successful applicants, and 7 of these will commence operations in the first quarter of 2027. And they've been allocated 41 slots across 6 of the key corridors. So the next step is to publish the next network statement, which will happen in February, or which is fairly soon. And important to finalize the detailed plans around the corporatization of the Ports Authority as well as the Rail Infrastructure Manager. In the Treasury's framework conditions, the guarantee framework conditions, the date for corporatization is set for September 2026. The board of the TER, the Transport Economic Regulator, has been appointed, and we'd like to see more appointments happen over the course of the year, as well as capacitating the rest of the regulator, which is important to give regulatory certainty to the industry. And then in terms of inviting private sector participation, the PSP unit has been set up at the DPSA, and bid windows need to be developed to launch the first phase of the RFPs for private sector participation. And this will obviously be based on the RFIs that were, the outcomes of the RFIs which were published last year. In terms of water, so South Africa has these severe water constraints at the moment. Non-revenue water sits at around 40%, which costs the government billions annually. So the objective of this reform has really been to incentivize investment in, or create an institutional framework to allow investment in bulk water infrastructure. So aligned to this is a number of preparations in place to establish the National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency. And it's quite complex. There's a number of steps that need to be taken to establish an agency, but a lot of progress has been made, and it's on track for establishment in April 2026, subject to a board being appointed. The other objective of the water reforms is to improve the regulatory framework, and part of this is a licensing framework which will be developed through the Water Services Amendment Bill, as well as setting up an independent regulator. And there's an advisory committee that's been set up, and the term of the current one has been extended, as well as new appointments for the next committee, and a detailed roadmap has been developed. So in terms of the next steps here, we need to appoint the NWRI board, secure the adoption of the Water Services Amendment Bill by the National Assembly, as well as advancing performance-based contracts for non-revenue water. Given the losses that we mentioned, I think performance-based contracts are pretty useful because they don't take ownership of the assets, but they create an incentive for contractors to actually perform and sustain the improvements in the infrastructure that they're working on. The water partnerships, so we're working closely with the Water Partnerships Office to understand what alternate models can be used to improve water infrastructure. In terms of visas, I think this is probably one of those reforms that has run fairly smoothly since phase 1 of Operation Vulindlela, both in terms of tourist arrivals as well as skilled arrivals into the country, partly through improved technology as well as partnerships. So there's the Trusted Tour Operator Scheme, and I think that signed up around 65 tour operators from China and India, and we've seen around 40,000 travelers entering the country. Then the electronic travel authorization system was introduced at an opportune time to support the G20. And it's already published around, we've seen through the system we've had around 60,000 arrivals. It's expected to lead to 1 million international arrivals, which will create between 80,000 to 100,000 jobs in the tourism sector. There's a nice stat that says something like 1 tourist arrival leads to, I think it was around three jobs in the country, or the other way around. We've already shown you the data on the international tourist arrivals, which is significant. And then the other part of this reform has been to position South Africa as a location for film productions as well as other creative productions. And the previous process to do this involved lots of paperwork, people waiting in line. So this is a streamlined process, stages, screen talent, and global entertainment scheme that the DHA has introduced in November 2025. And the next steps would be to invite companies to apply for accreditation in the film industry, We've all seen, or some of you may have seen the film, the G20 film that was screened on Amazon, as an example of films that have been run in South Africa. In terms of the ETA, it's going to become the single entry point for tourist visas for all countries that require a visa to visit South Africa. That means that biometrics are done. It captures biometrics, enables online visa submissions. So it's sort of like ensuring the safety element as well as efficiency in processing. And then the last step would be to clear the backlog in that's still there around visas. In terms of the local government reforms, I suppose this is one of the more complicated reforms, and these are the newer reforms. So part of the newer reforms was diagnosing the issue, which is why turnaround it takes some time, because you have to diagnose the issue. Then it's about setting up the policy and regulatory framework, and then you move into an implementation phase. And I think that's been our experience across the other reforms. So one of the key reforms here was around operational improvement in electricity and water, and these are closely tied to the previous reforms that we've seen. Or that I've spoken to. So one of the big reforms here that's run by the National Treasury is the Metro Trading Services reform. This is an incentive-based program, and the first cohort of 7 metros are now accessing their incentive allocations from an adjustment budget, and they're actually making good progress in terms of implementing 8 minimum criteria, which enable ring-fence trading services, particularly in terms of electricity and water, and strengthening management accountability and financial transparency, which is critical in our metros. The next area of this reform are the institutional reforms, so around thinking about the current institutional landscape and how and what needs to improve to create incentives for better performance. So the white paper is currently being reviewed, and as well as there are a number of pieces. There's the white paper, there's the review of the fiscal framework, and there's the MFMA bill. And all of these pieces of policy, legislation, and regulation are aimed at improving the accountability, the financial management, and the sustainability of municipalities, so that they're fit for purpose in terms of what's required going forward. In terms of the next steps, the next cohort of metros, or the metros that have been part of the Metro Trading Services program, are working to, or the Treasury team is and the World Bank team is providing technical support to refine some of their financial models, their investment plans, as well as their performance plans, so that their targets, their performance targets, are credible. Secondly, to produce the final draft of the white paper, which will be produced over the next few months. A lot of background work has gone into the research that's required to develop this white paper. There'll be public consultations on the MFMA amendment bill. And in terms of the fiscal framework review, there's a lot of data that needs to be collected to undertake this review. This review will fit into the white paper so that there's a coherent approach across government. In terms of the spatial inequality reviews, or the spatial inequality reforms, I suppose over the past decade, I suppose, we've seen the stock of housing increase and the number of and the cost of houses that are being developed, or the stock of housing decrease, but the cost of developing housing increase. So it's important to develop. So I suppose part of this reform is developing alternate housing models to increase the stock of housing available. And one of the key reforms on the table at the moment is developing an affordable rental housing model instead of ownership, because I think the previous reforms have really focused on, or the previous program under the NDHS has focused on ownership. So a draft report has been prepared, and the team is consulting with a broad range of stakeholders, and that should be finalized by March 2026. In addition, the other element of this reform has been around the release of public land, to increase the stock of the release of public land for housing developments. So the DPWI has established a strategic and special delivery unit, and they are doing an audit of publicly owned buildings, and they will advise what can be used for housing developments. They're also at the same time developing a standard land release methodology, which will accelerate the release of land to ensure that it's in the public interest. So the next steps are to complete the analysis of title deeds. I think we've spoken about this in other quarterly briefings. That's another important element of the of this reform. So the department will be capacitated to undertake this review, so you can understand the scale of the backlog and then prioritize the sequences, the sequence of events that needs to happen to clear this backlog, because part of it is really an administrative issue. Then finalizing the standard model for public land release, as well as implementing the affordable rental housing subsidy as a pilot to test its effectiveness. Okay, I've spoken a lot, but lastly, in terms of the digital transformation reforms that are being run out of the digital services unit, I think these reforms have really been around, the first part is around data sharing, creating this data sharing platform. So Mzansi Exchange was launched in October last year, and it's about sharing data across government. And I think we underestimate how important it is for us to have standardized data and the importance of sharing data for government, so that you're aware, as government, you're aware of what your citizens need and where the gaps are. So a number of departments are part of this pilot, and that includes SARS, NSFAS, DHA, National Treasury, Department of Transport, among others. Stats SA, of course. The second area of reform here is about getting government services online and sharing information. So the My Mzansi Citizen Services Platform, and if you go onto the website, it's quite useful because it provides a organogram of the roadmap and tells you what services are going to come online, and the focus is really going to be on high impact services. The gov.za platform has also been zero rated. And another important reform is around scaling digital payments. So the SARB has taken a stake in Pay Inc., and this will serve as part of its payments modernization program. And it establishes basically a national payments utility, and the objective is to really have digital payments that are affordable, that can be scaled and are inclusive. So in terms of the next steps, it's about launching the My Mzansi platform for high impact services and operationalizing the Mzansi Exchange pilot through a number of working groups, as well as integrating public infrastructure, including that of the SARB. So thanks very much. I've spoken quite a lot through these very detailed reforms. Thanks for listening. I think we have a significant amount of work that has been set out for the next quarter, and it remains critical to implement these models and to move into an implementation phase now that the issues have been diagnosed, as well as to finalize the frameworks, the policy frameworks, and keep the momentum on restructuring. Thanks very much. I'm so tired.
Okay. Thank you so much. I would like to thank all our presenters for giving us a quarter-3 update. And I would like to invite the panelists to come on stage. We're now going to get into the Q&A, where we are going to engage with colleagues here in the room and those online. What I'm going to propose is that we do it in this way. I would like us, if we have a set of questions that we'd like to ask our political principals, we start with those. And then afterwards, we get into the meat of the presentation questions. So am I seeing any hands in that fashion? Inside? If you can identify yourself and the institution you're representing.
A very good morning. My name is Katlego Lerodi from the SABC. I wanted to just check in on whether we are seeing the tangible impact of Operation Vulindlela on the communities that this operation finds meaning through. We had the minister, deputy minister, talking about how this operation will now move into the service delivery space. So with the various numbers of service delivery protests that we see happening day in, day out in various of our communities, how do we see this operation moving to allay some of those concerns? Again, we're moving into the local government elections, and one expect for those protests to continue and to basically be more profound. How do we ensure that at least the message lands as to the progress that then Operation Vulindlela is doing to allay some of those concerns coming from the communities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katlego. Is there another hand? Number 2 and number 3 at the back. Thanks. Can you send a mic in front here, please? Can I check with colleagues before that? Is there anything that is coming on online so that I don't leave anyone? Okay, you may proceed.
David Fraser from Peregrine Capital. First of all, a big thumbs up on certainly on the logistics and power initiatives. There's no doubt that that has come through very strongly and has made a real difference certainly for businesses in South Africa. I think what probably is the biggest priority right now is obviously local municipality delivery, which is obviously a new initiative from yourselves. Now, I see a bit of green there. I mean, one would think it is still the part of this country that is still denigrating, in fact, is continuing to get worse. The question is about sort of political will. Clearly, from the structure of our constitution, there is a impact. You cannot instruct local municipalities what to do. There's a difference there as far as how you can engage with these municipalities where you clearly see interventions are absolutely necessary. Perhaps you could just give us some background into what sort of political cover you have as a working group to intervene in municipalities where you are getting pushback from a political perspective. Are you able to call on the political principles to effectively instruct these municipal managers to listen to you and to accept an intervention, particularly when an intervention is particularly not welcome?
Thank you. Can I get number 3 at the back?
Samantha from the Reserve Bank. So Rudy took us through the dashboard and showed that there were 3 reforms facing significant challenges. If you can just elaborate on what those reforms are and tell us a little bit about the specific challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have the mic in front, please? There's question number 4. Online, can I check if there's anyone yet? All right.
Naledi Ngobo from the SABC. So my question is also in relation to the municipalities as well. I know that you guys had launched the Trading Services Initiative last year, and there was an incentive of around 54 billion that you guys are putting out for municipalities to participate. How much of that money has already been accessed, and have they been able to meet the requirements in terms of accessing those funds? And do you think the incentive idea is working or will, bear fruit in terms of getting municipalities to implement the reforms that you've proposed?
Thank you, Naledi. Can I now invite the panel to respond?
Yeah, I think Katleo's question. I was shocked with his voice. I don't need this. Can you hear me?
No, for online.
And also for the recording, Deputy Minister. You may come through to the mic.
I used to agitate and organize students, so I have no problem with speaking loud. So, Katlego, are we seeing the impact in so far as these reforms are concerned? We've not had load shedding, right?
No.
And it's as a consequence of these reforms. What we said, look, to have one company providing electricity, it's not good for South Africa, and we've got a lived experience out of that. And we said we need to do reform the electricity industry in order to allow the private sector to generate energy. In the past, according to the Electricity Act, you could only generate 1 megawatt as a private person, company, institution to generate. It was not allowed. We have changed that act, and as a result, a number of households, companies, they are able to generate energy without legislative constraints. And it is our view that that has also reduced the demand on energy on Eskom, because a number of people are able to generate energy, and therefore the demand on Eskom has also reduced. And the other solution that we came up with, it's linked to Operation Vulindlela in a way where we said, I mean, Eskom had a debt of 400 billion odd, and we said, look, we're gonna take that debt into the balance sheet of the sovereign, and that eased Eskom's balance sheet, and they could invest money in maintenance and so on and so on. So the impact is already there, as I said, and I take it that it's not only in terms of service delivery, the number of jobs that have been created. These guys, they crunch numbers every day. They can tell us about the numbers. Number of jobs that came about, that came as a consequence of the private sector investing money in generation. And there's also a huge opportunity now with the investment that is going to come in the transmission infrastructure. We need 14,000 kilometer infrastructure, and that requires 500 billion just to invest in the transmission infrastructure. Because we said it's important for us to allow the private sector to generate energy, and part of that is the renewables. And unfortunately, the transmission infrastructure of our energy was largely concentrated in the coal-powered stations, which is largely in Mpumalanga. And now we've generated a lot of energy in the Northern Cape, in the Capes. You need the infrastructure to get that energy into the grid, and that requires a lot of money. And as you know, the government, Eskom, we are constrained. We don't have money. That amount of money, and earlier here she was talking about the credit guarantee scheme that we've put in place to de-risk private sector investment into the transmission infrastructure, which simply says some kind of an insurance that if you invest in this infrastructure, transmission, we will set better condition for you to generate better returns insofar as the energy infrastructure, particularly transmission, is concerned. So there's impact, but there's also going to be greater impact as we open up this network industries that were dominated by the state-owned entities. Many of them were not also very efficient in providing the goods and services required by society and by the economy. So on energy, we're already seeing the impact. On municipalities, and I'll sit down. So the metro trading services, many of you live in Joburg, right? You pay money for energy, water, waste, and so on and so on. That money that you pay, it goes into a big pot called a budget of the metro. And those trading services, Joburg Water, the energy, city power, and so on and so on, they get allocated money by the municipality. We worried that not sufficient money that you guys pay go back to investment infrastructure for those trading services that should be providing water, electricity, waste removal, and so on and so on. You know, in the context of coalition governments, and I've observed it from the distance, you've got a lot of fragmentation. It has been made worse. Not that it was not happening in the past. It has been made worse by coalitions, in which you don't get a sense that there's some strategic agreement on how to invest, long-term planning. You have an MMC, who are ministers, mini ministers in metros. They've got pet projects. So that money that you pay for electricity, this MMC has promised kindergarten in his community. Not that those things are not important, very, very important. That money gets invested there, and the allocation of money, it's also a function of the balance of forces, trading, bargaining in the council, and increasingly, these entities that are generating money, they get stuffed. And that's why with water leakages and pipes are bursting. There's no proper maintenance of these trading services that are generating money for these metros. So what is our solution with these metro trading reforms? Is that these entities, they need to be empowered to reinvest that money. That money must go into these entities. They must account for it. So they need to have separate accounting financial statements that says, this is our balance sheet, this is our income statement, this is our cash flow. We got money from you guys as residents, and this is how we are spending this money in terms of capital budgets and so on and so on. So it's an attempt to bring some kind of discipline on how the money, funds that are generated by these metros are reinvested back into these metros. And it's not just for citizens. If metros don't function, we see metros as important engines for economic growth. If metros don't grow, they've got huge implications for our economic growth. I think Johannesburg contributes 13% of our GDP. So can you imagine if we mess up Joburg, what it does to the economy as a whole? And unfortunately, as National Treasury, we deal with the consequences of wrong decisions in the system, and they show up. in the fiscus. We're not able to generate revenue. The demand for services are higher. And we always fight with people because people always have revenue plan, but they will never tell you where the expenditure plans, but they won't show you where the revenue will come from. So these reforms are critical, and these entities, if we get them right, they will also be in a better position to go out in the market and raise money. Because investors, when they've got to see through that, okay, you are an entity, Joburg Water, you are going to be investing this money in your infrastructure, and this investment will generate cash flows for you, and investors are comfortable now that, okay, if we lend you money, we are comfortable that money will come back, and it will also reduce the cost of borrowing for these entities because the lenders are managing risk and making sure that they've got a better return. So this metro trading services, that is the intention. We are not imposing a particular model. All what we are demanding, it's accountability. So if, like in Cape Town, if they decide to have a business unit, not a trading service, a business unit within the municipality that does water, it's okay. But as long as they see through, if you're going to have Ilembe, wherein they have they've appointed a private company to manage their water, and they have no issues with water, with providing water for residents, for economic agents in that area, businesses, households, government, and so on and so on. It's okay. We're not imposing a particular model. It's up to the municipality to decide how they should deal with it. So this grant, it incentivizes those metros that are undertaking this reform. I don't have the exact figure now on how much we have spent on it, but we've met the metros and they are committed, they are interested in this, and we're meeting them individually. Before the end of calendar year, I met the Ekurhuleni. We had a very good meeting in which they were demonstrating progress insofar as this reform is concerned. And we're not worried about the outcome of local government and its impact on this reform agenda, because my sense is that all political parties, particularly in the GNU, are one on this reform agenda. Another reform agenda which is quite critical, again, in the context of municipalities. The Constitution says municipalities are water authorities, so they need to provide water. So the reform that we're undertaking, we're saying that these municipalities that are authorized to provide water, they need to be licensed. They need to be licensed for them to provide water. So you have to set up the conditions under which they need to provide water. If they don't meet those conditions, national government should be able to take over those licenses. We can't sit and be helpless and say, the Constitution says the municipalities are water authorities and they are not able to provide water. We drink dirty water, they are not able to provide water. And again, this has huge implication for service delivery for the citizens of this country. It has huge implications for our ability to provide water. And I always give this example that I became a mayor of Lekwa because Lekwa could not provide services, including water, to, it was Astral. Astral went to court and their prayer was only one thing, that please, national government, take over this municipality because they are not meeting their constitutional obligation of providing water. At that time, it was Minister Tito Mboweni. He was a mayor there of that municipality, because the municipality could not do what it was meant to do. Well, I was deputy minister of finance, and I had to be deputy mayor in that municipality. So can you imagine if many municipalities or many citizens and businesses had gone to courts and made a prayer or prayers that please take over these municipalities because they are not able to provide what they are supposed to do. So in the context of water, this reform that we are undertaking, it should empower the Department of Water to set conditions for licensing, and if you don't meet those licensing requirements, we should be able to intervene. So all this are meant for economic growth, which is also a necessary condition for for service delivery, because if we're not able to grow the economy, we won't be able to generate sufficient revenue to provide those services, including jobs. Thank you. And by the way, I will have to leave, and I should have apologized right at the beginning. I was expected to leave at 10 o'clock, but I said it's important for me to stay for a few questions. So maybe I'll stay for the last round, and if I'm allowed to leave after the second round. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, dear Masondo. May I now invite Deputy Minister Mhlauli?
Okay, no, thank you very much for the questions. I think DM Dr. Masondo spoke at length about municipalities and how the reforms directly link to that. But just to come to, and I think really around the question of the direct impact on the lives of citizens, because that's really what ultimately we want to see happen. So one of the biggest issues, and I think we spoke about it as well, that we know affects our country is unemployment. And we spoke about how we are seeing the green shoots in our economy as a result of these reforms. And I just want to give two examples and how these reforms have actually directly impacted on the day-to-day lives of our people. So if you look at, for an example, I think the report spoke about the tourism sector and the reforms that would have happened in terms of our visa reforms. So the report indicates that, if we can actually, we can't go to it right now, but the report indicates that just in the past year, so from January 2025 to December 2025, we've actually seen a record of 10.4 million tourists that have come to South Africa, which was a record number. This resulted in 17.6 increase from the previous year. And just to indicate that for every 13 international tourists, one local job is created. And so you can see the direct result of the fact that because you've had these reforms in terms of your visa regulations or your visa system, you've now seen how that has directly resulted in more tourists coming to South Africa, and how the fact that because we've had 17% more in just that year alone, tourists coming to South Africa, you can then do the maths. If every 13 tourists creates one job, you can do the maths in terms of how many 10.4 million tourists, how many jobs those then created. And we can see that in the unemployment numbers that we've seen the declining numbers in terms of unemployment. We've seen the numbers in terms of economic growth, and that is as a direct result of the reforms that we would have seen in the economy. The second example, again, how the day-to-day lives of our people have changed. We've seen the work that has happened in terms of, and we reported it on it as well in terms of the report, insofar as our rail system is concerned. We've seen how the reforms that happened in the rail system has resulted in our rail corridors being up and running again. We've seen, stations and corridors that would have been closed down in the past being operational. We've seen the reforms in terms of, what's happening with PRASA. And most importantly, we've also seen how this has put money in the pocket of the South African worker and consumer. Because now when a rail system is up and running again and a corridor has been opened again, that therefore means that they no longer have to spend X amount of money on taxis and buses, etc. They're now actually spending that money on a bus, on a train ticket, which is much less, which also then reduces the cost of the South African citizen who's able to then go to work and access opportunities in your urban centers. And I just want to come to the question of political will. And I'm sure, Rudy will give a more, detailed answer to it. I think the mere fact that we could have decided that Operation Vulindlela is a mere technical, it's technical teams where officials just meet, and the reports are presented, etc., etc. And the reason that DM Masondo and I are here today, obviously delegated by our ministers who are the actual champions of this project, which is the Minister of Finance, Minister Kodongwana, as well as Minister Nchaveni, is precisely so that as and when you do need political intervention in a particular area, you then do have the ability to then have, those political engagements to say that in this particular sector, we're not necessarily getting the kind of cooperation that we think that we want, that we were hoping to get for us to be able to have, the impact that we want to have in that particular sector. Where, of course, our role, of course, is not to crunch the numbers, but to unlock precisely those, political challenges that could arise. And we've had instances in the past, I'm sure, this is phase 2, instances in the past where you would need the political principles to speak to each other to say, in this particular area, we do find that the level of cooperation is not at the level that we would want it to have. Can there be a discussion around that? And I think Rudy did give a report to say that we've had fairly good cooperation from the relevant departments insofar as working with the team is concerned. And where there are hurdles, of course, that's why we are here, to really just unlock that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DM. Can I just check in the room if there are any questions for Deputy Minister Masondo before I can allow him to leave? Is that from, do you have a question from, okay, can we proceed?
Not about the budget, right?
Not the current budget. Thank you very much. Anton Earl from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. Deputy Minister, I really thank you for outlining the traded services reforms and much needed. But the one part that I'm missing over there is the major risk that is being posed by the high levels of debt from municipalities owed to our water boards, which is at over 25 billion rand at the moment. And that's having an operational constraint for the long-term sustainability of some of these water boards. Are there any interventions planned in that realm? Thank you.
Thanks. Over to you, DM.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue in which these water boards are owed by municipalities and ESCOM as well. It's also owed by municipalities, and I'm sure you're aware, insofar as ESCOM is concerned, we put a debt relief program, which include, as part of the conditions for them to have a debt relief is to install the meters. Because part of the main problem insofar as energy is concerned, ESCOM is concerned, has been the non-payment, basically. And those municipalities were not able to generate enough revenue to pay the municipalities. Now, one of the, and there are conversation between us and the Department of Water and the Water Board on how we find a sustainable solution for the debt owed by the municipalities to water boards. But one of the things that we are doing to is the whole issue about revenue water, because we're also losing a lot of water as a consequence of poor maintenance. And with the DBSA and this water partnership project, in which we're trying to crowd in the private sector in terms of investment in the water maintenance. In the way the program works, and I think it's in KZN, in eThekwini, and we're trying, the uptake by other municipalities has been very weak and poor. The logic of this program is as follows: private sector, invest your money in maintenance of water maintenance, help us in dealing with leaks and so on and so on. But of course, you invest in order to generate returns. So how are you going to get your returns back? We will give you the responsibility to recover the money from the users of that water. So you fix, and after fixing, we enter into some agreement, you as an investor and the municipality, and agree on how much you're gonna get or charge the users from this. So, and as we've met ASISA has been very supportive of this initiative, and we're looking forward to more investors participating in this. Investor appetite, from my assessment, it's high. It's just getting our municipalities to participate in this program. Perhaps it brings us back to the point that David raised, the political will. And I think Deputy Minister Mhauli has already indicated the political will that we have right at the top from the President, because we report all this work to the President and say, President, we're not moving here. One day, when I retire, I'll write some notes about... No, I'm saying the nights that we spend and how the President will crack some of the ministers in those rooms, asking them how far are we with this reform. It gets heated up because the President is very, very committed to this reform agenda. And I think Rudy knows what I'm talking about. One night, and I won't say which specific reform because you will now link it to a minister in a particular period. So the commitment right from the highest office to get these reforms going, it's solid. There's no doubt about it. The team at eThekwini has been doing very good work. And of course, you need willing partners in these municipalities, and I also get a sense, even in the between political parties. I think, in the context of what we're facing, low growth, and the need for us to move with speed insofar as generating growth, within the GNU itself, there's huge commitment to these reforms. And of course, these reforms predate the GNU. It's a continuation of the reforms that we've been undertaking long before the GNU. So, David, the political commitment, it's there. And I think we also need active citizenry. You guys need to participate and push us for these reforms, because if you leave us in our offices and you don't vocalize your support for these reforms, we may not move with the speed that is required. But the commitment within government, right from the President, it's solid, it's there. May I be excused?
Thank you.
Yeah.
You may be excused. Thank you so much.
We'll meet at the budget.
Yes. Thank you, colleagues. We are continuing with our engagement. Can I check a set of questions that are coming? Yeah, okay. Yes.
Maybe just. So, is it working? Oh no, it's working now. Yeah. So it's not a question of the political world. I think both DM Crowley and DM Masondo. I think it's important to understand when we decided to launch the local government, we'd upfront said that there's a complex system, right? When we deal with the reform on a national or provincial government, it's easy because there are ministers that are appointed by the head of state. And there's a performance agreement, there's an APP that is there, annual performance plan, and various interventions that are decided at a national level. There are specific and quite distinct constitutional powers that is then cascaded into the Municipal Systems Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act, where elected officials are appointed to carry out the responsibility as it is for national government. So in this instance, you have to think through what has happened over the last 25 years in local government, right? And of course, we made a number of assumptions about that 25 years ago. And many of those assumptions don't hold. So you've got to think about how we improve intergovernmental relations or improve the system of local government in a systemic way. Because political will is there and everyone says that. So I think it's important to look at the one reform, the second reform under local government, and where we've made some significant progress, and hopefully in the next few months would launch the local government policy white paper that is intended to fundamentally address some of the challenges that are there. And I think that's an important part of the systemic reform. Because out of a policy paper, which we refer to as a white paper, we have to give them due consideration on whether the policy changes that we have to adopt, potentially, I don't know, but potentially there may be legislative changes to improve the system. And then again, the intergovernmental work that is important. So what we have done in the last 2 years is ensure that we implement that intergovernmental framework relations, IGFR, through the work that we've done in eThekwini, which has been fairly successful and spoken about. We've turned around the municipality, national, provincial, and municipal, working with private sector partners, with unions, with civic organizations. And similarly, we're doing something which is slightly behind in the city of Johannesburg. And hopefully we look at some of the other interventions that are there. So it's less about the political will, it's how we design the system and make the changes. So at the coalface of delivery, that does happen. Second question from the top. There are 3 areas, right? 2 of them are electricity. One relates to the reform and the restructuring of Eskom, particularly. And the second one relates to slightly off track on the electricity distribution industry reform. And that also relates to the restructuring of that. The restructuring of Eskom is complex. I mean, dealing with energy is easy. In trying to resolve the energy insecurity, we had a plan and we had to do this. But I think we are laggards in the reform of our energy system, and that's the restructuring of the utility. And both DM Crowley and Masonda had talked about the importance of competition, bringing down price, the restructuring of Eskom, allowing for private sector participation in generation, and then, of course, the separation. And these things are complex, right? And so as we go through it and realize, okay, there are a couple of sequencing stuff that we've got to get right, for example. You've got to get stuff right from a regulatory point of view. You've got to follow and get a license before you do and issue a market code, for example. You've got to do this and that. So it's a bit in toing and froing that we've so the reforms in the electricity sector are likely to be pushed out slightly because we've got to follow particular processes, and I think it's important that the commitment remains that we continue with the restructuring of the electricity sector and Eskom being in the center of that. The third reform is, of course, the title deeds, and we are still behind on that to be able to ensure that we meet that, but we are working with the Department of Human Settlements to ensure that we fast track and deal with it systemically. and are able to implement. So those are the three reforms which are not significantly delayed, but do require support and for us to be able to understand that. In the actual OV report, you'll see some of the details that are there in relation to all three, where they are behind, and particularly remedial steps to be able to address that. And the team, Alia and Sol, are working fairly hard with the rest of the OV team and the departments to be able to address that going forward.
Thank you, Rudy. Can I check if any other panel member wants to amplify anything? All right. We're still continuing with our engagement. Nothing is coming on online. I think the clarity that is given here is making people becoming comfortable. I'm now coming back into the room, checking as to who wants to take the second round, which will be the last round. SABC?
Sorry, I don't think I got
Your response on your question.
with regards to the reforms in terms of the municipalities, there was an allocation of the 54 billion. My question was how much has been accessed?
No, he did answer it. He said
He
he doesn't
did.
have the figures with him,
Yes.
but we'll share it with you.
Oh, and then
Yeah.
which municipalities have been able to meet the requirements?
You can send me that question.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Okay, you can take it.
Okay, I
Go.
can take that question. So I want to send you the correct numbers to make sure that, before you publish anything, that it is correct. But by the end of June, we should have all the metros in cohort 1 with the ring-fenced utilities. And I think the amount that has been allocated is 2 billion across metros. And that's around just under 500 million to 100 million, depending on the size of the metro. That was the allocation that was made in the adjusted budget for the initial allocation. So that's what's been awarded so far.
Happy?
Just to add one thing about that, to understand the numbers. So as Alia said, that's the first tranche, and that's on the basis of the metros simply having put in place their plans, the performance improvement plans, which demonstrate their commitments, the reforms they're going to implement. Accessing the next tranches going forward, which will be much larger of the total 54 billion, will depend on their progress against those plans. So the council formally adopting the plan is step one, and then there'll be an independent verification process year on year. If they meet their targets, they'll access more and more of that funding, and it's 54 billion over the next 5 years. They're also required to match that funding. So it's 54 billion rand from the fiscus in additional grant funding for water and electricity and sanitation infrastructure in the metros. And each 1 rand of incentive funding will unlock 1 rand of funding from the metro itself. So actually it means over that period, the next 5 years, 108 billion rand additional investment into that infrastructure in total. But it will be a very, very rigorous system. If they don't meet those requirements, if they don't ring fence, if they don't demonstrate they're reinvesting the money into the assets, those metros won't access the incentive funding. So it's quite a powerful, if you look at as a proportion of their total investment in these services, a very big, powerful incentive. And we think metros will be very highly incentivized to implement these reforms. Sure.
Okay, are we together? Can I check the last round before I propose closure to the Q&A? We want to ensure that you have all the clarity so that you write positive stories. I see 2 hands.
Sure, thank you. Good morning. Isaac Matero from Nedbank. Just following up on just that point, you presented a chart with 3 growth scenarios. I'm interested in scenario C, the underlying assumptions, particularly the timeline. Are you going to share that with us? Maybe in the budget review, I don't know, maybe not for a year, but it's all about the momentum of the reforms, so it would be quite interesting to see what the assumptions are. Thank you.
Thank you. The one at the back. Okay, change your mind. Thanks. Can I get a response to the question?
As soon as we're done here, you'll get the full OV report that does indicate the graph and the assumptions underlining some of that. unpack it a little bit more in the budget as well as we go forward. Certainly.
So that figure is in the MTBPS
Yeah.
of last year, and the assumptions are in the box that describes the scenarios. But it's basically full implementation of a number of reforms, so water, electricity, visa, transport, and then I think just a few of the newer reforms. If you want the full details, we can actually send that to you. After
If
this.
I may just emphasize, but so the Treasury has done that modeling, but let's just take some of the other work done by other independent research organizations, PR, come very close to the same thing. And it is about what we can do above baseline, right? So assuming in 2028, 2029, as the predictions are, it's that delta, right, that gets us to the 3% that we've set out as a target. Now, I mean, many will say, but that's not ambitious enough. But I think the reality is where we are. As we've said, we've got a good tailwind, Sol uses that fairly well. We've got momentum. We're driving the reform, significant political support. And that's the point that I think is going to be important. And it's not just the OVs, just think about it. We've always said this, the reform is fundamental and important because that's what creates confidence and unlocks in the network sectors that have not been opened up to the private sector. So all of this is important. But there are a number of other factors also. Fiscal discipline, for example, macroeconomic stability, dealing with trade and trade-related challenges that we sit with, ensuring that we have sufficient design incentives to be able to address, for example, sectors in distress or new growth sectors. So it's a cohort of many interventions that would have to do that. And I think this is the most important part of it. Again, that's the delta that we got to get. We got to break the fact that if we continue as normal in that graph, we won't get employment. We know that when we get to 3%, then things start becoming quite interesting. You get excess of 500,000 new jobs per year entering into the labor market. You get investment in new capital formation, expansion of existing investments. This is the importance about why that trigger is important, and for us to be able to perpetuate and sustain the momentum going forward.
Thanks, Rudy. Anyone else? Okay. Is there any question before I propose closure? Everybody's happy? That's okay. I thank you for your engaging questions, and I'd like to thank the panelists as well. Let me invite the Deputy Minister Mhlawuli to just give us a vote of thanks.
Okay, I feel like Claire had already done that, but just to round things up, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here today, and of course for the continued support of these quarterly briefings and the continued engagement with the team. I think it's only through these engagements that we can also, improve the work that we do. Of course, thanks to the technical team from the Presidency as well as National Treasury for the very rigorous work that they do behind the scenes to ensure that at the end of the day we meet our targets and we can turn around the economic narrative of our country. We can change the story about South Africa's employment numbers, South Africa's growth numbers, but of course the prospects for a prosperous South Africa. So thank you very much for having been with us here today, and we will see you again when we release Q4 of our report. Thank you.
Thanks, dear. Because we're a nation that works for all, there is refreshments outside. Thanks.